Welcome to the Museum of Orphan Concept, a guided tour of ideas that Irrational discarded or reworked heavily during the making of the original Bioshock. This exhibit shows an early model for the bouncer. This original model for the bouncer type of Big Daddy featured a flat-headed drill at the end of each arm. The Big Daddies were envisioned as the builders of Rapture, with weapons modified from tools they would have used in its construction. When the Gatherers were reimagined as little sisters, one of the bouncer's drills was changed to a gloved hand so that the two characters could interact with each other. This exhibit is the Slow Pro Fum, Irrational's eternal name for this prototype Big Daddy variant, who mauled players with its enormous hook and fired iron bearings from a barrel, stood for slow, projectile, fucked up melee. He survived long enough to become a fully functional AI, but the team eventually cut him to focus on polishing the other Big Daddy types. This model later appeared in Bioshock 2 as the Rumbler, throwing miniature turrets instead of cannonballs. This exhibit shows off forest concept art for Rapture. Irrational's artist tried to envisage how an underwater city would actually function in this early conceptual work of Rapture. One idea imagined a thick forest for the purpose of oxygen exchange, seen here with an observation catwalk running around the edge. The concept of using trees for oxygen exchange made it into the final game in the Arcadia level. This exhibit shows off the Gatherer. It may be hard to imagine that this creature, whose job it was to reclaim Adam from corpses around Rapture, was the earliest iteration behind the idea of the Little Sister. Since the Gatherer generated absolutely no sympathy from players, the team experimented with concepts for featuring a number of animals, including the infamous dog in a wheelchair, and later a grotesque miniature humanoid. Finally, a concept sketch of a deformed child inspired the Eureka moment responsible for the Little Sisters. This exhibit shows off hanging sea life. Not as much as a cut concept as an Easter egg for the observant museum visitors. These sea creatures can be seen swimming past the player's view during the bathysphere ride down to Rapture in Bioshock's opening sequence. These sketches show off early Big Daddy concepts. These are the early concepts for the Rosie type of Big Daddy who, like the Bouncer, was envisioned as a construction worker who had been repurposed as a protector for the Gatherer. This sketch shows an early concept of the Splicer. Moving from grotesque to human was a slow process. While early concepts saw the melee enemies grew monstrous arms, the team had trouble conveying how someone who had spliced to become a marksman would appear. This exhibit is called Pre-Yam Hand. Before solidifying the fiction around Adam, Irrational experimented with the idea of it being an external injected substance. Here you can see us playing around with the Adam being mechanically injected, said lead artist Sean Robinson, so the Splicers got vials of it on his belt. This model was created but never made it into the game in any form. Both of these sketches show off early Splicer concepts. These are some of the first concept sketches to show Bioshock's enemies moving in a more human-like direction. Artists coupled that approach with the idea that Adam deformed the body in a way that related to its intended function. For instance, a giant grotesque arm on a melee enemy. This exhibit is called Stitchy. The first splicer that Irrational created for Bioshock, Stitchy, was used in many early concept demos and was fully functional in-game with kinetomatics, hit reactions, and voiceover. It took us a long while to realize that he wasn't a good model, says lead artist Sean Robinson. This is probably the worst abortion that Irrational has ever made. These three drawings show off Protector concept art. The Big Daddies, originally called Protectors, were envisioned as a dive-suit construction worker retasked with the defense of Atom Gatherers. They used construction tools or improvised weapons that look like they have been found on the seafloor. From left to right are the early concepts for the melee, ranged, and slow projectile protectors. This exhibit shows the early concept for the Grenader Splicer. This gray elephantine splicer was an early Grenader from the same period of development as Stitchy and Hooker. He was the guy who spliced to carry on giant grenades and to throw them at you, says lead artist Sean Robinson. The model was built and textured, but never animated. This exhibit shows off an early environmental study area. The location depicted here was built for the visual demo of Bioshock, a small level demonstrating several of the key elements of the game such as Big Daddies and Gatherers. This next concept art shows off Neptune's bounty. This area appears in the Neptune's bounty level of Bioshock, but the bodies floating in the ocean were cut late in development when their cast shadows proved too distracting from the action in the room. This exhibit shows off the Hooker Splicer. Created around the same time as Stitchy and the Grenadier, this Splicer was dubbed the Hooker because of her weapon of choice. This concept evolved into the Spider Splicer when it was decided that Splicer models could fill any behavior role, and the Hooker model later became the Baby Jane Splicer. This exhibit shows an early Big Daddy concept art. This is an early concept depicting the Big Daddy bursting through a wall, which inspired the audio log in the Big Daddy Training Grounds area about a rogue Big Daddy. The player then encounters him at the end of the level. This other concept art exhibit shows off a sub-bay concept area. This concept sketch, depicting what would later become a submarine bay, an area which housed an important seed for Atlas. This exhibit is referred to as the Missing Link model. This character is essentially the missing link between the grotesque early designs and the human splicers that appeared in Bioshock. This is the last bad model we did before moving on to what we actually went into the shipping game, says lead artist Sean Robinson. After playing around with him for a while, we just said, why don't we use humans instead? I always thought of these as Scooby-Doo monsters because they are too inhuman to invoke empathy. This exhibit shows off another early Big Daddy concept. This was the fourth Protector concept, originally created with an organic slug attached to it. A model was started but never completed as the team narrowed their focus to 3 and finally just 2 Big Daddy types. I still like this as a Protector, said artist Rob Waters. We started modeling and I really pushed to get it in, even as just a static model on the floor, but it never made it. These two drawings show off early creature concepts. These were some of the earliest pieces done for Bioshock, from back when Irrational was still working on SWAT 4. The only concrete ideas at that point were an undersea city and a biological experiment, so the early concepts focused on those themes. This large drawing attempts to demonstrate iconic Rapture element. This was one of several paintings that tried to portray the most important elements of Rapture at once. These images would help define the ruin, underwater Art Deco aesthetic that the team was attempting to capture. This exhibit shows off a model affectionately referred to as Yamhan. This character, derisively called Yamhan around Irrational Games, was the poster child of the conceptual phase that preceded the decision to go with human enemies. I'd point out the drawings behind the model, says lead artist Sean Robinson. You can see the top one got built, but the other two informed the design as well. As we trended towards more humanoids, the Scooby monsters got goofier and less scary. This exhibit shows off another iconic Rapture concept art. This was the first image that really captured all the visual elements that made Bioshock Bioshock. A large view of the ocean, the aquatic lighting scene, and the elegant Art Deco design elements. Without this image, Bioshock would have been a radically different beast. And lastly, we end with a concept art for Fleet Hall. This early concept for Sandercone's Fleet Hall was created after level building had begun, when the designers found that they were having difficulty conceptualizing the theater space. It was one of the earliest spaces built for Bioshock, and many of the assets used in this museum come from that area.